Hey guys, this is Matt Core from ControlPaint.com, and today we're going to be talking all about controlled brushwork. Because I look at a lot of beginners' artwork and I see the same mistake done over and over. And that is, they're looking for sort of a smooth, rendered look, but instead they end up with a bunch of overlapping, visible brush marks. So today's exercise is designed to practice having smooth rendering and avoid that kind of an effect. But as a quick reminder, if you look below the post, you'll find links for free brushes and worksheets, as well as in-depth premium series available in the Control Paint store. So your assignment is to copy my rendering samples. And I've attached two sheets of these, one that's black and white and one that's in color. So I'll show you what I mean by doing a few of them, and then it's up to you to do the rest on your own. Looking at this first one in the upper left-hand corner, you can tell a couple things about it. First, you can see that it's got hard edges. There's also a bit of a gradation from the bottom left to the upper right. It starts very white and it ends up being a bit grayer. So there's a bit of a fade. So that means there's going to be two things: smooth rendering on the inside and hard edges on the outside. Well, that's a perfect candidate for what I call temp layers. So I'll use maybe even a soft brush, and I'll paint by selecting this white color and start with the intense white, and then it fades out a bit over the edge. So that is the smooth fade. Well, now I want the hard edge. And you could do this with a mask if you wanted. I'm just using the eraser tool, but however you want to do it's fine. And now I'm working on cleaning up that edge, trying to reproduce the shape that I see in my example. So the shape's not exactly right, but the important parts are there. It's got the correct smooth fade, there's no visible brush marks, and it's got a very sharp edge. And at this point, I'd be happy to just flatten this down to the rest of my document and move on to the next one. So here I've skipped ahead to a little more complicated one. So this one has a dark outside and a middle gray fade, and it fades back to dark on the other side. So I'm going to actually show using a hard brush for this. So I'm starting out by using a hard brush. I'll then make a new layer and paint that lighter gray on the inside. And if I want to make that fade a little bit better, maybe I'll switch to a soft eraser and soften up that fade a little bit. And I'll flatten those two together and now worry about that hard shape for the outside. So the shape may not be exactly right, but the key elements are there. No visible brush marks, a sharp edge, and the proper fade from dark to light and then back dark again. Now once you finish the first sheet, which is all black and white, it's time to move on to the color sheet, and this one's a bit more technical. So we'll start with this oval red shape. And I'm going to begin by painting the base color and working on the actual silhouette of this shape. Now I'm going to turn this layer into a clipping mask, and this is a subject I talk about plenty in the video that I'll link at the bottom of the post. So now I'm going to paint with the pink highlight color, and you notice that it's got a fade, but then it ends in a sort of a pinch. So it's got a sharp quality right here, but then a rounded soft quality here. So there's sharp and soft. And you can see how that indicates a certain type of surface. And you notice I don't have to worry about going outside the lines, and that's what the clipping mask is helping with. So now I'm going to make a new layer, make it a clipping mask, and I'm going to paint this blue color with a soft brush on the right side of it, as well as on the left side of it. I'm going to erase away if I've painted too much. So there you can see I got a variety of soft transitions, hard transitions, and all the paint strokes are contained within that sharp outline. So once you're happy with all these, you can flatten them down and move on to the next one. So in this exercise, even though we're using color, go ahead and use the eyedropper and copy my exact colors. This is all about brush technique. So your things to consider are going to be clean rendering, no visible brush strokes. The second thing you're going to consider is going to be your edges. Is it a hard edge or is it a soft edge? That transition between the two areas of color is incredibly important. So even though this may seem boring or straightforward, by the end of these 18 drawings, you will have learned a lot about your brush control, and it'll be something that you can apply to any paintings you want. So good luck and have fun. Thanks for coming to Control Paint, guys. In digital painting, you'll often be required to imagine man-made forms. And when attempting to capture realism, attention to edge detail is incredibly important. So in this video, we're going to take a close-up look at man-made edges, as well as how to render them in Photoshop. I've also prepared a template for you, so give this whole lesson a try with the download link at the bottom of the post. But as a quick reminder, if you look below the post, you'll find links for free brushes and worksheets, as well as in-depth premium series available in the Control Paint store. So if you were to envision a set of dice, they'd just be simple, six-sided forms, right? Well, let's zoom into this SketchUp file and take a closer look. This is what you might have envisioned. Six-sided forms that come to very sharp edges. Well, the fact is, this is pretty unheard of in real life. As I move down the line, the other two examples are much more realistic. This has a soft bevel, and this one has sort of a crown molding detailing on it. So if you took a quick look at the objects on your desk right now, you'd notice that lots of right angles are present, but that if you look really closely, what you might have described as a right angle are actually made up of soft bevels and chamfered edges. And when you're inventing objects for your illustration, these tiny details do make a difference, because those sharp razor edges, as seen in the first one, really don't exist in real life. So to investigate a variety of different edge types, I made a simple object in SketchUp, and then using different chamfers and bevels, got some different results. And here you can look at the different profiles represent a side view of the image. And since this is in Photoshop, I actually made myself a little coloring book just to test out these different transitions. So all the layers that I'm working on are inside a layer set that has a mask, which stops me from painting outside of the lines. So I can only paint in this white area. And using any brush I choose, I'm going to simply try and recreate those edge transitions from the bottom examples. And I can even go ahead and use the color picker to sample my colors, because all I'm focusing on is the specific type of transition. Is it a sharp chamfered edge, like these middle ones? Or does it have more of a smooth fall off, like these bevels? So here I've gone ahead and made myself some color swatches, and I've made a fresh layer below them so I can draw with the hard round brush. You can see where that mask is really helping me stay inside the lines. Now the critical part here is this chamfer. So I'm going to make a polygon lasso to really select those edges carefully, and then paint that high value in there. And this is the most perpendicular to the light, so it's going to be the highest value. And then I'll go ahead and finish up the rest. So I'm matching the same values from the example. And one more time I'll get this hard edge polygon lasso out just to do the sharp edge where it catches the light. I'm going to leave the other 4 examples incomplete for now and encourage you guys to download this template and give it a try yourself. Now this may seem like a silly exercise, but it again is putting one aspect of drawing under the microscope and just working on that. And then next time you go and make an illustration, when it comes time to make an edge on a man-made object, you might think about these profiles. Is it a hard chamfer or is it a soft bevel? And then you'll shade the image accordingly. Hey guys, this is Matt Core from CtrlPaint.com. In the last video, we talked about creating textural overlays using smart objects and the warp command. And where we left off, we were planning where we were going to put our smart objects, and we had sort of drawn the shapes of our form. But as a quick reminder, if you look below the post, you'll find links for free brushes and worksheets, as well as in-depth premium series available in the Control Paint store. So I'm going to look at these and actually create these placeholder images. So for the chassis, it's not really a square, it's more of a tall rectangle, about like that. And I'm going to lock the transparency here just so I can give this a very rough thirds. Okay, that'll just give me some reference points. And then I'm actually going to paint a half down the center. Okay, very beautiful. So now that I've got this image here, I'm going to convert it to a smart object, and now I'm going to use the free transform to put it in place. And I'm going to lower the opacity a little bit just so I can see what I'm doing. And then I'm going to right click, do warp, and move these points into place. And here I'm roughly following that guide that I drew on the actual illustration, just to make sure I get my profiles set up correctly here. And if this using the warp tool is something you're not very used to doing, it just takes a little practice. And you can always adjust this later so you don't have to get it perfect the first time. Okay, so I will hit enter, confirm that. I'm going to hide my guides for a second here, and then bring the opacity back up to 100%. At this point, I also like to apply a mask. So I'm going to hide the cockpit. I don't want to do any overlays on top of the cockpit. Now the mask is totally optional. This is just a way to give myself a little more control. And then make sure to unlink the mask. For reasons I don't fully understand, Photoshop does not like it if they are linked for this process. And now all it takes is double clicking on the smart object, and you will have your new document. So as I change the contents of this document, here I'll just throw something on there real quick just to see if it worked. Hit save, and then it updates in your scene. And at this point, you're probably going to want to make some changes to your free transform warp. So you hit Ctrl T for free transform, right click, go to warp, and now you're just going to make some adjustments to make sure that it is deforming the way you want it to. And perhaps in your mask, you might want to soften this edge so you can't see that harsh cutoff. And now I've officially created the link between my smart object and the contents, which can change to whatever I want it to. Next, I'm going to repeat the process with the wings, although here I've gone ahead and created a little bit of a stronger placeholder image. So my wings are essentially squares, and I want 2 of them. But I'm going to do the transform twice on the same object, because I actually want the wings to be mirror images of one another. So here I'll convert it to be a smart object, and I'll call it wing A, and then I'll duplicate a copy and call that wing B. So with wing A, I'm going to lower the transparency a little bit, do my free transform, confirm it, and then I'll repeat that same process with the other wing. Now, in order to make these mirror properly, I need to make sure that the A's are both touching the chassis and that the C's are on the wing tips. So the whole reason I'm putting alphabet letters on here in the first place is so that I have a bit of a map in order to better visualize where my content is going to be lined up. Sort of like a blueprint. So once again, I'm going to add just a little bit of masking so I keep these wings exactly where I want them. And now all I need to do is change the contents. But here's where it's really cool because both wings are actually the same smart object. So when I change one, the other will update as well. So I'm going to prove that here just by making a new layer on here with something very visible. So currently, before I save, they both look like they did when I set up my alignment in the first place. But now after adding the blue, I'll save this document, and you see immediately both wings update. And that's really nice if I want to have something that is very obviously mirrored. Like here I put some stripes, which will show up on one end of the wing. And if I look at it and see that I did the wrong side, not a problem. Just move the one part, hit save, and it's updated. Now, of course, you're going to want to change the layer modes maybe to overlay or multiply. This is not the end of the process. But as a matter of getting content wrapped around your image, almost like a vinyl wrap on a car, this process gives you a lot of options. Because once I've set this up the first time, I can change the contents to whatever I want. Each of these options maybe only took me 10 minutes. So if you want to experiment with some pseudo UV unwrapping, a little bit of almost game texturing, give this a try. All you need are smart objects, the warp tool, and to replace that content. Have fun with it, guys. Thanks for coming to the site. Hey guys, this is Matt Core from CtrlPaint.com, and today we're going to talk about using the smudge tool. As you know, blending paint is going to be one of the most fundamental techniques required for digital illustration. If you're just starting out, the smudge tool seems like, well, it's a pretty reasonable choice. Especially if you've been doing lots of graphite drawing, smudging in order to blend is pretty standard. So in this video, I'm going to show you how the smudge tool functions and why it might not be the best choice for blending paint. But it still does have its uses, and we'll look over those special cases. But as a quick reminder, if you look below the post, you'll find links for free brushes and worksheets, as well as in-depth premium series available in the Control Paint store. So here I've got two areas of color on the left, and on the right I have sort of a same colors but with some blending in between them. And this is something that you're going to want to achieve very often. Now I'm going to use the smudge tool on the left to try and achieve that same result. Now I have the smudge tool set to about 80% strength. And you can see what happens here is it's almost like I'm pushing the paint. I'm going to zoom in and show this up close. So it's as if the two colors are both very wet, and I'm sort of dragging a stick from the blue to the darker purple. It's not really blending so much as shoving. Now I'm going to actually put in an extra little stripe here. I'm going to show you one more example to really make this pronounced. So when you look at that, it's just pushing one color through to the next, but it's still retaining those stripes. It's almost like if you've done marbling in a little metal tray with some marbles and some wet paint. This is the effect. Pretty interesting, but not really what you want for blending. Now sure, you can change the effect by lowering the strength of the tool. So here I'll lower it to about 25%. And you can see it's different. But even though the intensity is less, it's still the same general effect. It's like I'm pushing the paint through the other paint. Not so useful. It's going to be hard to make that clean blended look. Because what I'm looking for is this look here on the right, where I have a very smooth, almost like a gradient from one color to the other. And as I've shown in the other blending videos, that is much more easily achieved using the brush tool and the eraser tool, and often a few extra layers. So this asks the question, well, is the smudge tool a complete waste for digital painting? Well, I don't think so. Knowing that it creates this sort of rippling effect with paint, there are some situations where this is actually exactly what you need. Look at this example of water bending light. If you look here at the very edge of this water in a glass, it's sort of distorting what I'm seeing through the water. This refraction effect is distortion that actually looks a lot like what the smudge tool is doing naturally. Because all of the colors are still visible, they've just been sort of pushed and bent. Another time I find this extremely useful is when I'm doing special effects. So you might remember this guy from previous videos, But what if I wanted to add a little more distortion into these magic effects? Well, I might zoom in here and use the smudge brush because I can allow its marbling, light bending properties to push the paint around as if it were really wet. So you could see that could be really useful for certain cases. It's more of a specialized brush. And I should also mention that you can change the brush tip shape and also have a different effect with that. So here I'm going to use a bit of a rake, and you can see what that does. So hopefully you can see that the smudge tool is not ideal for your standard blending tool. But when it is useful, it can be really useful and might be the only way to achieve that specific look. So there's one more thing I want to add about when you actually use the smudge brush, and that is to avoid working destructively, because it might be natural to use the smudge brush on the actual layers you want to smudge. So here I would select layer 1, do my smudging, and that would be the end of it. But the better way to do that is to actually do it on its own layer. So I'm going to undo those, make a new layer, and make sure that sample all layers is checked in the brush properties. So now what I can do is smudge with the exact same results, but what I've done is make the smudging on its own layer, and I have not affected the layer underneath. And I can make that even more apparent by moving this top layer. So you can see that the smudging itself happened on its totally own layer, and when I move it back into place, you could never tell the difference. So just like a lot of other things in Photoshop, you could either work destructively and hope it works out okay, or you can work in a way that'll give you a few more options. So here, if I don't like it, I can either delete the whole layer and it's gone completely, or I can erase part of that layer and have much stronger control over the way that smudge is used in the final image. And once again, that option is called Sample All Layers, and it's near the top of the screen. So go out there and use the smudge brush, but probably not for blending. Have fun, guys. Thanks for coming to the site. Photoshop is complicated. Painting is complicated. Combining the two can seem extremely complicated. So when you're just starting out, the least you can do is to eliminate one variable from the equation: color. In this video, I'll make a case for learning the fundamentals first in grayscale before you move on to painting with color. But as a quick reminder, if you look below the post, you'll find links for free brushes and worksheets, as well as in-depth premium series available in the Control Paint store. Now, I recognize that it's unlikely that you're going to spend years drawing still lifes with a pencil before you ever pick up Photoshop. It may be one of the best ways to learn, but I recognize that it's not terribly realistic. So if you're new to painting, it's worth looking at the way that art school approaches the problem. In art school, you first learn to draw before you learn to paint. If you start out with a pencil, there's only a couple of variables. You're working with lines of varying thickness, and you build up value through hatching. Simple. One step more complicated is charcoal. This gives you the ability to not only lay down lines, but also to blend them together and to create pure value. But either way, each of these is only working in value. No color to worry about. And this is a good thing, because there is so much involved with creating a 3D illusion on a 2D surface. With each mark you make, you're answering a laundry list of questions. How hard is the edge? How directly illuminated is the surface? How close is the viewer to the object? And so on. There's a reason the introductory drawing classes don't allow colored pencils. Beginners already have plenty to think about. But you're using Photoshop, and it does things a bit differently. What it calls the brush tool can drift from pencil to brush, from grayscale to color. And there's no difference in cost. There's not even drying time to worry about. So it can be incredibly tempting to jump straight into color. After all, it's only one click away. But I encourage you to take it one step at a time. If you're doing photo studies, try first turning them into grayscale. If you're able to set up a small still life on your desk, even better. But just think about the light and the shadow. I know that all the video games, movies, and illustrations that you like are in full color, and you'll get there eventually. But trust me on this. Try starting slow and limiting yourself to grayscale for the time being. It really is the surest way to discover lighting and to discover form. Good luck, and thanks for watching. Hey guys, this is Matt Core from CtrlPaint.com, and today I'm going to talk about the merits of using a toned canvas. But as a quick reminder, if you look below the post, you'll find links for free brushes and worksheets, as well as in-depth premium series available in the Control Paint store. So what does that mean, a toned canvas? Well, all that means is using something other than pure white to make your paintings on top of. And let me show you a simple situation where it would be useful. Here I have a rendered ball. But if I wanted to add a highlight to that ball, I'd have trouble because the white of the page is as bright as it's going to get. And already the white of the page is being used to describe the halftone of this ball. Well, if instead of painting on top of white, the entire canvas were a bit darker, then adding a little highlight on top of that would very quickly give me that glossy three-dimensional look. So what this means is I'm taking advantage of that medium tone of the background and using that as sort of the halftone of my rendering. So then I can add darker paint to make the shadow and lighter paint to make the highlight. But I don't have to spend all that extra time painting in the medium value. Whereas if I started with the white, I can't get any brighter than this. We're already at the maximum value. So let's take a look at this practical example. Here's a normal looking sketch. It could have been a digital sketch or a sketch in a sketchbook. And I have it on the white of the page. Well, if I wanted to add some shading information to this, it would take a while to make the whole thing darker and then bring back the highlights like I did in the last example. Whereas instead, I could put that on top of a toned canvas and then add a few highlights and a few tones, and then much more quickly, I come to this more full value range. That's how you're going to show form, through having dark darks and light lights. So really, if you start in the middle, you don't have to draw as much. It's sort of a shortcut. And this is not limited to digital either. You might have seen people using toned canvas sketch paper or even sketchbooks. And these are great. This way you can bring with you both a darker pencil as well as a white pencil, and you can achieve the same exact look on the go. And in that way, it really makes your sketches come to a more full rendered look much more quickly. And the same idea also applies to traditional painting. It can be really common to lay down a toned ground on the blank white canvas before you do any of the actual painting. Once again, same idea. Start from a mid-tone and you'll have less work to do. And finally, if you're doing a lot of digital work, the white of the canvas is actually kind of hard to look at. I sit in front of monitors almost all day long, and these days I really don't like having a full white canvas. It's just sort of hard on the eyes. So a lot of times I'll start with at least a light gray, just so I don't get as much eye strain. So it's got some practical applications as well. But whatever your reason, try out using a toned canvas. You might enjoy it. Thanks for coming to the site, guys. Hey guys, this is Matt Core from CtrlPaint.com. And in today's video, we're going to continue talking about brush control. And this time we're going to put it into practice in a larger drawing. But as a quick reminder, if you look below the post, you'll find links for free brushes and worksheets, as well as in-depth premium series available in the Control Paint store. Your assignment is going to be to copy this geodesic dome. And don't worry, I know it's a very complicated shape, but I'm actually going to provide the line work as well as color swatches for you to get started. So all you have to worry about is your brush control. Because if we take a look at the end result here, you can see a couple things. There are large, flat facets, each of which have their own value. So they're essentially flat color leading up to the edge where they bump into another flat color. So here you'll be testing painting large areas of flat color with no visible brush strokes with sharp edges between the two. And if you want to add some more detail to yours, by all means, go for it. So the only thing I'm giving you here is a flat image. You're going to be painting completely over top and are going to eventually cover up all the line work. But this is going to be a great test of your ability to do temp layers and to have good, clean brush work. So you can use any kind of brush you want. So here I've jumped ahead and I'm about halfway through the illustration. And you can see that all of my progress is done on a single layer. That's because I've been working in temp layers and then flattening as I go. So I'm going to select a hard round brush, and I'm going to use the eyedropper to sample from the color that's provided on the line work. Now the key here is going to be drawing with large strokes to get that even rendering, painting way outside of the lines, and then erasing away what you don't need. And I'll erase probably with a hard round brush. And if you find it's hard angle to have, you can actually rotate the canvas and draw at a more natural angle to your arm. So I've drawn way outside of the lines, and I'm erasing away. Now when I come to the next area of color, I've actually already saved myself some time. Because if I'm smart, I'll take advantage of those hard edges I've already created. So now I'm going to make a new layer underneath the layers that I've already painted. And I'll select this color from the swatch. And now I can't go wrong on these 3 edges, because I've already defined those with the rest of the painting. The only places I can go out of the lines here are on the right side. So I'll need to use my eraser here as well. So I'm not using any lassos or marquees of any sort. I'm just painting and erasing. And then once you've covered most of the canvas with paint, it might be time to come in and do some cleanup work. So here, if you've left some lines a little bit visible, you can use the shift-click method to pull a straight line. And that'll help really clean up those edges. And this is when you'd zoom in and do your fine detail work and make it as clean as you want to. And potentially, you even want to make those edges a little bit more interesting and give them a little bit of roundness. So I could add a tiny bit of highlight that's being caught on the edge of that form. Maybe that's too much, so I'll erase it away a bit. So when you're done with this assignment, you should have a very clean image with no lines showing. And the things you want to think about are to have clean brushwork, no visible mark making. Another thing you're going to want to think about is the way that your 2 areas of value meet up. What is the edge quality? And for this drawing, it should be primarily sharp edges. And finally, just use the brush and the eraser tool. You're not going to need to use any other tools for this assignment. So if you've been having trouble making clean rendering, you're not alone in this. This is something that many artists struggle with. So assignments like this will hopefully show you that you're very capable of making flat, smooth-looking rendering. It just takes some different technique. So good luck, have fun, and thanks for coming to CtrlPaint.com. Hey guys, this is Matt Core from CtrlPaint.com, and today we're going to take a look at some hidden features of the brush tool. But as a quick reminder, if you look below the post, you'll find links for free brushes and worksheets, as well as in-depth premium series available in the Control Paint store. You are going to want to change the diameter of your brush a lot while you're painting. And an easy way to do that is to hold down Alt and then right click and then move left or right. So if I move to the right, you'll see a red circle get bigger. And if I move to the left, you'll see it get smaller. As soon as you let go, that is your new brush size. So anytime you see a temporary red circle pop up on screen, that means I'm changing my diameter using Alt and right click. Now at the same time, you can hold down Alt and move up to soften your brush or down to make it hard again. So this can be nice if you want to do some careful edge control, and maybe you want to soften up your edge here, but leave your diameter the same. You can do that without changing your brush. Now this only works on circle brushes. It does not work on custom brushes. But since the circle brush is something that I use a lot of the time anyway, this is pretty handy. Now if you don't like the ability to change the brush hardness, you can use that same setting to change the brush opacity. And you can find that in the preferences. Down here, there's an option that says vary round brush hardness based on HUD vertical movement. Well, what that means is if it's checked, it does brush hardness, and if it's not checked, it does brush opacity. So here I'll do the exact same keyboard shortcut, and you can see it's getting more intense red or lighter pink. And lighter pink just means it's low opacity. Now, personally, I don't paint much with opacity. I prefer to use brush flow, so I almost never have this option turned on. And I much prefer using brush hardness with this keyboard shortcut. It does take a little while to remember this one, but Alt is pretty easy to reach, and I like to have right-click set to one of my stylus buttons anyway, so really it's pretty convenient. But either way, this is another one of those awesome opportunities to hide the menus, get rid of the interface, and just paint. So give it a try, and you might want to work this into your own process. Thanks for coming to the site, guys. Hey guys, this is Matt Core from CtrlPaint.com, and today I want to talk about customizing the way your pressure sensitivity feels. But as a quick reminder, if you look below the post, you'll find links for free brushes and worksheets, as well as in-depth premium series available in the Control Paint store. So in your Wacom stylus, you've got a little spring, and what that spring does is it tells the computer how hard you're pressing down on the tablet, and we'll call that force. 0% force means you're barely just touching the tablet. 50% force means you're pressing halfway down, and then 100% force means you're really straining and you're squeezing that spring all the way down. So Photoshop takes this 1 to 100% scale and applies it to whatever property you want. So if it's opacity, if you're touching 100% force, you'll have 100% opacity. Likewise, 50% force will give you 50% opacity. So you have a linear relationship between the two. Well, if you're pretty new to digital art, you've probably installed your tablet and had no idea you could adjust the way that this feels. So here in the Wacom tablet properties, you can see on the pen tab, there's a thing called tip feel, which ranges from soft to firm. And you can modify this and get a very different range of pressure. The problem though is that even if you were to move this all the way down to soft, because you're used to, say, painting or drawing with a pencil, which usually requires very soft marks, on this force graph, the 100% force remains unchanged. And this is a problem. So even on the softest tip feel settings, you have a long extended range of soft marks you can make, but then at the very end, to get 100% force, you still have to press down really hard. And in my opinion, this is a problem. To solve this problem, I had to look beyond what Wacom offers. This is a third-party software that's a free download called the Tablet Pressure Curve tool. And this graph should look pretty familiar. If you were to change the properties inside of Wacom's utility, you'd be moving the center point, giving it either a softer touch or a firmer touch. Either way, you're leaving the maximum pressure at 100% because that's fixed. Well, what if I don't want to press that hard? What if I want the maximum pressure to be only compressing the spring halfway? Well, you can do that with this software. So if I move the 100% force halfway down the y-axis, what that does is it tells the Wacom pen to ignore the second half of that spring. So once that spring compresses to 50% of the way, I've applied what used to be 50% pressure. That is now converted into 100% pressure. So really here you're getting an actual soft feel. You never have to press all the way down. And this is a lot easier on my wrists. Also, if you're used to making very gentle marks with a paintbrush, this would feel a little bit more like what you're used to. If you've never changed the way the tip feel works on your pen, I'd suggest starting with the official Wacom Properties utility. It's pretty basic, and for a lot of people it'll work fine. If you've already tried that and it's not working fine, then you might want to try out the Tablet Pressure Curve tool. Again, it's an unofficial download. Tech support will not be able to help you out with this. It's sort of a use at your own risk type of program. Although I've been using it for a number of months and it seems to work great. It doesn't, however, work for Mac as far as I know. So if there's any Mac users out there that know of a great alternative to this download, let us know. So if any of you guys have personal stories about tuning in that tip field just right, we'd love to hear about them in the comments. So thanks for watching, and stay tuned for future videos. In the last video, I talked about how to use Photoshop to remove the line work from your drawing. And in this process, you're turning your drawing into a full-fledged painting. But what I didn't answer is, what are you going to replace it with? How are these edges going to relate to the image that you're working with? Well, really the only place that this discussion can begin is talking about what a line is to begin with. So what's a line? But as a quick reminder, if you look below the post, you'll find links for free brushes and worksheets, as well as in-depth premium series available in the Control Paint store. Here is a simple line drawing. You can immediately recognize it as a box or maybe a die that you would roll, but it doesn't have much to do with real life. If you picked up one of these objects and held it in front of you, you wouldn't see any black lines. It might look more like this. Each of the surfaces are at a different angle to the light, so as a result, they have a different value. They have a different lightness or darkness. And what we represent as a line is really just where two of these surfaces butt up against one another. But in almost every case, you don't have a razor-sharp edge that the line might indicate. In fact, this isn't a very realistic cube because these edges are too perfectly sharp. So when a drawing turns into a painting, you have to consider these transitions. As you go from one surface to the next, what would that feel like? Well, if this were a die, you'd probably have a bit more of a soft, rounded corner, a little bit of a bevel. And so I can indicate that with a soft brush here, just to show you what that looks like. So all of a sudden, this is way different than any single line could represent. And so as you get rid of the lines in your painting and begin to replace them with transitions from surface to surface, what you're doing is describing the form much more descriptively. And in this case, it's actually going to change the silhouette of the cube a little bit. It would be a little more chamfered off there. And at a micro level, this is much more like a real object. So giving a little special attention to where one surface butted up against the next surface on our cube made all the difference in the world. And that should help explain why when you turn the lines off on the skull, all of a sudden it reveals that the painting is really lacking. Because what those black lines are doing is covering up the crucial transition between one surface and another. And when you hide them, you can see the real truth, which is, well, you didn't spend much time on the area where one area of value butts up against the next area of value. So how I decide to make this transition says a lot about the form. And I don't want a perfectly sharp edge because that would be a little too mechanical. Nothing in our body is a 90-degree angle. And if I go too soft, it won't look right. So this area as these two values transition from one to the other is really describing the form. And using value in this way, specifically values transitioning into other values, is really how the viewer's eye is going to determine the three-dimensionality of these objects. So you might be wondering, well, when would I use a soft edge versus a hard edge? In this case, I've got reference to look at. So it's really just a case of looking at my source material and trying to replicate what I see. But if you're making something up, or just want to use a good rule of thumb, remember that the more distinct the transition, like this hard line between gray and white, that means that it's a really sharp angle, just like the box. But if it's a very soft transition, like this one here, that means it's a very shallow angle. And so you can see here this ridge transitions from sharp into very soft. And that tells you something about the form. Another good rule of thumb is that the edge of a silhouette, like where this skull touches the background, is generally going to be a little softer. This is especially important with soft materials like skin. You really don't want skin to have a hard, rigid look to it. Generally, putting a little bit of a softer edge around the silhouette will give it the more lifelike quality. So you could say that external edges, or the boundary of a form, is going to be a softer edge, where interior edges, like the ridge of this eye socket, might have a little harder of a transition, so you'd have a little more contrast. So I painted a little while longer, and I hid all of the lines. So you can see that this is by no means a finished painting, but anywhere where there was some sloppiness that was previously hidden underneath those lines, I've now cleaned up into an intentional transition from one area of value into another area of value. And this is no easy thing. As you get better and better at painting, a lot of what's improving is your ability to intentionally transition from one face or surface to the next surface. And how that transition is, whether it's soft or hard or some combination, tells the whole story of the form. So this is not going to be a quick learning process. Hopefully these videos, though, showed you at least where to start and how to use Photoshop to accomplish it. Thanks for watching, guys. On Tuesday, I showed you how to approach drawing straight and clean lines inside of Photoshop. I also showed you how to use the ellipse template to do curves. Well, today I'm going to show you how to take those two techniques and to build a line work in this mechanical prop. But as a quick reminder, if you look below the post, you'll find links for free brushes and worksheets, as well as in-depth premium series available in the Ctrl Paint store. So the brush that I'll be using for this entire process is a bit like a pen. It does have some pressure sensitivity on it, but you could use one that had pressure sensitivity turned completely off if you like, because for this type of line work, you're not going to want too much opacity jitter. So I like to begin by defining the outer contours. These are sort of the outlines of the shape. And I'm going to be doing a bit of draw through, where you draw beyond where you want to go to, just so you get that confident line. And then you can erase away where you don't want. But before I know where these lines end exactly, I'm going to need to define those ellipses. So I'm going to make a new layer. And I'll form an ellipse. And then I'll do the select, transform selection. And then I can actually get this ellipse right in place. And when I'm happy with it, I hit confirm, go to edit, stroke. And for now on, I'll be using a keyboard shortcut to pull up the stroke menu. So you won't see me go to the edit menu anymore. So now I'm going to define the next contour here on its own layer, stroke. Okay, and I'm happy with the way those two live together, so I'll flatten them to a single layer. And then I'll go back down to that first layer where I made those original lines, and I'll erase away what I don't need. And then on a new layer, I'll define this back ellipse. Transform my selection. Confirm, stroke. Erase away what I don't need. Okay, now I'm going to fast forward a bit and establish the rest of the primary contours. Now, generally speaking, I'm not a huge fan of time-lapse videos, but in this case, it's a lot of the same steps repeated over and over. But I think it can be useful to see how it is that I actually build this from start to finish. So this is sped up about 3 times, and I've also hidden the cursor, so all you're seeing is the results. And I've gone ahead and hidden my layer stack, but know that I'm not keeping very many layers at one time. I'm adding a few new ones, and then when I like them, I'll flatten them down. So on the face near the camera, I've got 2 cylindrical tubes that are nearly identical. One will be slightly smaller than the other, but there's really no sense in drawing both individually. So you'll see I'll draw the first one, so I'll duplicate the entire thing, and then move it over into correct perspective, and save myself a fair amount of time. Oftentimes at the end of a cylinder, you have a slight bevel. What this means is that you're going to have two ellipses that are perfectly in parallel and very near one another. Usually what I like to do to save a little time is to draw one of these, usually the bigger one, and then duplicate it, shrink it slightly, and move it a little off center. And that way you don't have to define your ellipse twice. You just do it once and save yourself some time. And what I'm doing here, now that I've got my major anchors in place, is putting a little surface detailing in. For a last little bit of detailing here, I've decided to drop out of the time lapse and show you in real time. My goal here is to make the ribbing on the side of this cylinder. So instead of drawing it a bunch of times, I'm just going to draw it once, spend my time on it, and then duplicate it. So any sort of fine surface detailing that I'd want in each of these ribs, I'll draw on here. And I'll erase it a little bit just to soften it so it doesn't fight as much with the outer contour. I want this to be sort of low relief. Okay, and now that I'm happy with it, I'll duplicate it down the line, free transforming into perspective. So this is a great example of where you can let the computer do the work for you. Where I've drawn it once, and it's not especially creative to draw the same thing over and over again, so I'm going to let the computer sort of take over that burden for me. And then I'll flatten all those down together so they're on a single layer, and I'll erase away where I don't need them. And then I'll hide my underdrawing, and you'll see that what I'm left with is a particularly sharp drawing. Nice and clean. So before I wrap up, I want to give a quick shout out to reader XRG. They watched Tuesday's video and saw that there was a feature I was not using, which is the transform selection command. This is a feature I've been wanting for years, and it turns out it was there all along. I just didn't know about it. So it really goes to show that there are just little things hidden in Photoshop that can change your process for the better. So thanks a lot, XRG. If anybody else has any interesting additions to this process, I'd love to hear about them. So put them in the comments. Thanks, guys. Hey guys, this is Matt Core from CtrlPaint.com, and today I'm going to talk about the agility of your brush tool. And the secret is keyboard shortcuts. Okay, it's really not that big of a secret, but this is going to improve the way you paint in immeasurable ways. So listen up. But as a quick reminder, if you look below the post, you'll find links for free brushes and worksheets, as well as in-depth premium series available in the Control Paint store. First off, there are going to be commands that you use a lot more often. For me, they're things relating to the brush tool. So I'm panning the document, and that's the space bar. I'm switching between brush and eraser, and I certainly don't want to go back to the menu for that. So I have two hotkeys, one to be brush and one to switch back to eraser. With the brush, I like to be able to have a small diameter or a large diameter. Again, keyboard shortcuts. I also like to hotkey the color picker. It's a simple thing, but it makes a big difference. And beyond simple hotkeys, I also like to have a few actions. So things I do often are make a new layer. It's a very short action. Single key press, and now I have a new layer. And that is very nice for the way I like to paint with temp layers. I have another action that gives me a new multiply layer. So that action is very short as well. Make a new layer, set the layer to multiply. And this allows me to glaze. I also have a third button that is merge down. And I've actually set this to a single key press by using an action, but you could set it to a standard keyboard shortcut if you like. So I've got one shortcut to give me a new layer, and another one to merge that down onto my stack. And these might not be the exact keyboard shortcuts that you use all the time, but for me, these are the keys that I'm always using. Same with zoom in and zoom out. I'm constantly doing that. So for me, I'll put those keyboard shortcuts near my fingertips. Now this may not seem revolutionary or very exciting, but I know that artists like to avoid technical stuff. And there's really nothing very exciting sounding about keyboard shortcuts. But if you have certain commands, especially ones relating to the brush tool, you're going to be using them all the time. You might as well take some time, design a new keyboard layout, and this is going to involve remapping the keyboard shortcuts, and you can find that in the Edit Keyboard Shortcuts menu. But once you've set up some of these basic brush controls to be on the left half of the keyboard where your hand normally sits, you are going to love the new layout. Now this really doesn't have much to do with traditional art, but it is a surefire way to improve your painting. And it can be hard to explain exactly why this is, but something about removing the technical clutter and just focusing on the painting will really lighten the load and will make you a much better artist. So if you guys have any interesting layout of your own, let's hear about it in the comments. Thanks for watching and good luck painting. In the first 3 parts of basic rendering, we've talked a lot about techniques and a lot about theory. Well, in part 4, I'm going to put it all together and make this painting from start to finish. But because I can't really show you every single brushstroke, I've decided instead to focus on my decision-making process. We'll start by exploring the importance of composition, solving those visual problems when the image is rough. And then once we're happy with those results, only then will it be time to enlarge the image, make nice line work, and paint the final version. And since no painting ever goes as planned, you'll also see problems arise, but we'll talk about how to deal with them. Really, this is all part of the illustration process. So if you want to see how all the theory and technique comes together, make sure to check out Basic Rendering 4 in the Control Paint store today. Hey guys, this is Matt Core from CtrlPaint.com, and today we're just going to start out by talking about 2 very basic brushstroke types. But as a quick reminder, if you look below the post, you'll find links for free brushes and worksheets, as well as in-depth premium series available in the Control Paint store. So when we're talking about basic brushstroke types, really I think of it as 2 categories. You have opaque paint, and then you have translucent paint. I'll pick a little more visible color here and you can really see what I'm saying. So you can see how those 2 sort of fundamentally behave differently. One you can see through and one you can't. Well, the way that we do this in Photoshop is a little different than the way we do it with traditional paint. So I'm going to delete these layers here and we'll explain which is which. So if I want to paint opaque paint, that's easy. To do that, all I do is make a new layer. And then you'll notice this little rectangle here says normal, which is called a blending mode, and normal is the default. And in this case, normal means opaque. Now if I make another layer, and this time I'm going to change this little drop down to the multiply option. And now I'm going to paint with the same exact color. And you can see this one looks transparent. You might call this a glazed layer, as in I'm glazing with translucent paint like oil paints. So really that's all there is to it. It's called a blending mode, and it is a property of a layer. So I'll often paint with a normal opaque layer, but sometimes when I want to have sort of a glazed look, I'll make a new layer, set it to multiply, and then this will allow everything on this layer to have sort of a glaze look. Now, one thing worth noting is if you merge one layer down onto the layer below it, you'll see that it absorbs the blending mode of the lower layer. So here, what was previously a glazed layer and a normal layer, when I flatten the 2 together, they're both a normal layer. So I encourage you to just mess around with both these. Get out the brush tool, pick a basic brush, and try working on normal layers and on multiply layers. Have fun, guys. Thanks for coming to the site. Hey guys, this is Matt Core from CtrlPaint.com, and today I'm going to do a bit of a painting demo using custom brushes in order to create this still life. But as a quick reminder, if you look below the post, you'll find links for free brushes and worksheets, as well as in-depth premium series available in the Control Paint store. Now, normally I like to stay away from time-lapse footage because I feel like it's a bit dishonest. So know that this footage is sped up about 4 or 5 times, so I don't paint this quickly, not even close. But I wanted to be able to give you the painting from start to finish in order to show the entire workflow of using these custom brushes. So this first half of the painting is what I call the layered phase. And all of the painting I'm doing is direct painting. I'm not using any glaze layers, it's all normal opaque layers. But I do have one layer on top, which is my line work. So I don't have to worry about messing up the lines as I paint underneath them. And this is a great way to block in a painting, because I can get the structure down without accidentally covering up that line work that I drew. It's also a really nice way of working in order to get a gestural loose quality, because you notice I'm making big action-packed strokes. And that's no accident. Because the lines are on a separate layer, I can work confidently like this, knowing I can always erase away and refine that layer. They're temp layers after all. And actually this pink glaze that I'm adding right now is the only time that I glaze in the entire painting. So everything else you see is done on normal layers. And I have my flow turned down a bit so I'm not laying down too much pigment at one time. But it's very basic, direct painting. Now at this point I've essentially got my entire painting blocked in. So I'm going to flatten all these temporary layers down, including the line work that was on top, and enter the flat phase. So from this point forward, I know the big picture is correct. I've got the proportions right, mainly the colors are all in the right place, and all I need to do is refine. So now I don't really need to keep those lines separate anymore because it's all pretty well established. So from here on out, I'll keep making those temp layers. Add a new layer, paint a little extra, erase part away. But all the while, really, I'm just refining. I could stop this painting at any time and call it done. Now, clearly this is a sketch. It's not a beautifully refined painting. But this phase can go on for as long as you want. The longer that I stay in this refining phase, the more finished the image will look when it's done. And I really like this phase of the painting because it's low stress. I've already established everything, so this is just the polish. It's hard to mess up. Now here as I paint the specularity on the orange, you see I'm trying out a couple different textures. Well, having a texture library that you can modify your current brush with is really handy. And this is another subject that I talk about in custom brush design, which you can find in the store. So the brush itself is pretty basic, but the naturalistic character is coming from that texture that's applied over top. And I really like working in this way, because it's sort of the best of both worlds. I like using the basic 3 brushes, and I've said this before in a bunch of videos. Hard round, soft round, and hard flat. They work really well. They give a nice, easy rendering. But then when you add in a little bit of extra texture, it gives you that nice gestural loose quality as well. And it really is amazing how much you can change the characteristic of these basic 3 brushes with just some different textures. The next step here is going to be working on this shiny chrome cap. It looks sort of weird, but it's actually a cap from a big thermos I've got. It's great for keeping coffee in. But it's got a really smooth surface with smooth gradations between the light and dark. It's got a bit of banding because it's a machined chrome metal. And so to create this look, I'm actually working with a really soft airbrush with only a little bit of texture on it. And I'm going way outside the lines, focusing mainly on those transitions. But here I can go in and sharpen up the edge when I'm done with the interior shape. So I get a nice, clean looking metal because it's got that sharp edge. So sometimes it's great to go outside the lines at first, be really soft and sloppy, and then later come back and clean up your silhouette. Same goes for this top here. I didn't even paint in the top until I was done with the rest. And that just makes it a little easier to control, because things like ellipses can be a challenge to keep tight. And this vertical specularity is a great opportunity for a naturalistic brush. As you can see, just a few strokes gave a nice character to that hot spot in the specularity. It's amazing how much of material information we get from the way that hot spot looks. If you spend a little extra textural time on that little bright highlight, you will tell worlds of information about the rest of the material. And this is another thing that custom brushes are great at. Even if you're using more basic brushes for the rest of your rendering, put in a little special texture in that highlight and you'll sell it. So at this point, I'm ready to call this thing pretty much done. I could noodle around in details forever, but really this is about as much detail as I wanted to throw in for our demo today. So hopefully these 3 videos have convinced you that custom brushes are something you ought to be using, and really, probably something you should be making yourself. So remember, tomorrow, custom brush design goes on sale, and I hope you enjoy it. Thanks for watching, guys. Applying decals and surface patterning to rounded forms can seem like a daunting challenge. In this video, I'm going to show you how to use the warp feature of Photoshop to make the process much less time-consuming and more repeatable. For my example, I'll apply this checkerboard design to the shoulder pad of my orc. But as a quick reminder, if you look below the post, you'll find links for free brushes and worksheets, as well as in-depth premium series available in the Control Paint store. Now, as a side note, this is some fan art for a game called Blood Bowl, and the copyright is held by Games Workshop. It's a great game, by the way. So the general idea of this technique is to think about the decal as one of the last steps of your illustration. You'll begin by rendering the form as a solid material. It'll make it easier to paint. And then once you're happy with the way it looks, you'll paint your decal on a separate document, or at least on its own layer within your document. So I've gone ahead and created this checkerboard here. So you can see it's on its own layer, and it's a very simple thing. So my first step is to get it roughly in place, and then to make a rectangular selection with a little breathing room, and hit Ctrl T to open the Free Transform menu. And now once I'm here, I'll right-click and get the Warp command out. And the Warp tool gives me a 9-panel grid, which is also called a lattice, and this is made up of control points. Now these points might look familiar to you if you've ever used the pen tool. So you can move these points around, and it'll deform the shape held within the lattice. So I'm trying to match the form of the shoulder pad by moving these points around. And when you're happy with it, hit Enter to confirm. And then deselect. And now I'll free transform just to get it in the right spot. And then to integrate it into my illustration, I'll drop the opacity a little bit. And I'll use a soft eraser to erase away where it's in shadow. So what you see there was a pretty simple example because a grid is not all that hard to draw in perspective. But think if I had a really detailed tattoo or some sort of an interesting pattern that I wanted to put on his shoulder. It'd be much easier to make it first as a 2D graphic and then use the warp tool to deform it into place. Hey guys, this is Matt Core from ControlPaint.com, and today we're going to do a little brush tool troubleshooting. Because if I had to guess, I would assume that some of you have had trouble getting the brush tool to work the way I'm demonstrating. So let's take a look at some of these factors that might be giving you those bad results. But as a quick reminder, if you look below the post, you'll find links for free brushes and worksheets, as well as in-depth premium series available in the Control Paint store. First off, what if your brush does not have any fade at all? It's completely solid. The first question I'd ask is, are you using a mouse? If you're using a mouse instead of a tablet with pressure sensitivity, this is always going to be the result. So the first step is make sure you have a tablet. But I can assume that we all have tablets. So the next question would be found inside of Window, Brush. These are the properties that control the brush. I'm going to make sure that Transfer is turned on. It's a little checkbox on the left side. And you can see that this turns on the pressure sensitivity. Great. Okay, so transfer is thing number one. So you are drawing along and then all of a sudden your brush has visible overlap. That is not a look we're going for. This almost never looks good unless you're trying to make something that has a repetitive look to it. But if you're just trying to get smooth blending, you don't want this. Well, this can be caused by a couple things. But the first thing to look for, once again in the brush properties, is you go to the brush tip shape, which is at the top of the list. And then down here on the right side, there's a thing called spacing. Right now, spacing is set to 30%. That's way too high. You want to drop that spacing down to less than 10%, maybe 4 or 5%. And this hopefully will erase that segmented look and make it much smoother. Now, depending on the type of brush you're using, this also might slow your computer down. This brush here is a simple circle, but if I were using a really complicated texture brush, this low of spacing might give my computer some trouble. So on the flip side, if you find that a brush is really slowing your computer down, well then you might want to go to the spacing control and increase the spacing and find a nice balance that doesn't look too segmented, but that also keeps the brush moving quickly enough. Another reason your brush might be looking a little segmented is if your flow is set very, very low. Sometimes flow that is extremely low will give a bit of a segmented look. Once again, this is mainly tied to spacing, so it's oftentimes a combination of both low flow and slightly too large of spacing, and the end result is a bit of a segmented appearance. Sometimes when you're painting with color, it just does some really weird effects. This looks a bit like a blending mode, but if I check on the layer palette, this layer's blending mode is set to normal, so that's not the problem. The color is just one color and the brush doesn't have any strange properties about it. There's actually a second blending mode built into the brush, and this one's one I almost never change. But you can see up here on the top of the screen, there is another blending mode pull down. Make sure that is set to normal. And then as you draw, it'll just behave the way you're expecting. And what this means is the blending mode can either be across the entire layer. So for instance, I make a new layer, set it to color dodge. Anything I draw on this layer is going to be affected by that new blending mode. Or you can have the individual strokes themselves have their own blending mode. So here I'm painting on a normal layer, painting with my color, but if I change this drop down up here to something like overlay, well then it's going to have a different effect. And if this changes accidentally, all of a sudden your brush can be behaving very strangely. So I'd say 95% of the time you're going to want to keep this set to normal and just forget about it. Now, it's possible that these few fixes will not solve your problems. A fair amount of the way my brush is behaving is just due to practice. A lot of it, honestly, is just feel. But if something's not working, make sure to check in the brush properties, transfer. Within brush tip shape, check your spacing. Up in the brush properties panel, check your flow. And then check the blending mode pull down. This one should probably be set to normal. If you get all those things going, your brush is probably going to behave properly. And all the rest is just practice. So if you guys have had any problems like this or are continuing to have issues, let's talk about it in the comments. This might be some common problem that somebody knows the answer to. Thanks for coming to the site, guys. Using another artist's custom brushes is nice, but knowing how to dig in and create your very own from scratch is far more powerful. Every example in this series leverages Photoshop's brush engine to go from concept to completed brush. So stop downloading other people's brushes and start making your own. Hey guys, this is Matt Core from CtrlPaint.com, and in the near future, I'm going to have a custom brush design series that's out in the store. So before then, I want to show you a few unusual ways that you can use custom brushes in your workflow. And for today's video, we're going to add some dynamic shadows to this boring sidewalk. So here's the sidewalk with no shadows. And then here's the same sidewalk that looks like light is coming down through leaves of trees. And it looks a lot more interesting. It's more dynamic. But it's also very technical to get this sort of a look. It'd be really hard to paint all of these leaves from this camera angle. But as a quick reminder, if you look below the post, you'll find links for free brushes and worksheets, as well as in-depth premium series available in the Control Paint store. If you've watched many of my videos, you know that I like to do rendering with temp layers. So I'll use a opacity brush on its own layer, and then go to an eraser and erase away what I don't want. And in this way I can get nice smooth rendering. A lot of times when I use a custom brush, I'm going to be painting in an entirely different manner. And for these leaves, what I'm going to use a custom brush for is to create an interesting shape, an interesting silhouette. And I'm actually going to make it in a totally different document to begin with. So my goal here is to draw a bunch of leaves as if they're being seen from the top down. This is sort of my shadow shape when seen out of context. And this custom brush is great at giving me a randomized edge. I'd have trouble rendering with it, but when it comes to just making this shape, it's very purpose-built. It does a good job at this one thing. And I can use that same tip as an eraser and erase away some gaps in the leaves. And with a little more of this, I get a pretty naturalistic looking shadow shape. So here's my boring sidewalk, and it's time to bring that leaf shadow shape into my scene. Now you'll notice right away that this is in the wrong perspective. Well, that's not a problem. I'm going to make a safe copy and then begin to distort these into the right perspective. So you can see already that painting the shape of these leaves in perspective would have been a real challenge. There's a lot of different angles to consider, and that would have made the shape probably less randomized at the end of the day, because I would have had to think too carefully about it while I worked. Now the black doesn't really work, but all I'm doing here is trying to get the shape correct. And I'm going to use this shape to create sort of a stencil or a mask. So I can merge all these together, use Ctrl-click to grab a selection, and then I'll make a layer set and assign that as a mask for the layer set. So now anytime I make a new layer, it's going to receive this mask. And at this point, I can use any brushes I want, including the brushes that I'm more familiar rendering with. So I've set this to multiply. I'll pick a shadow color. And now I'm just painting with a basic airbrush. But because of the shape of that mask, I'm only painting in these shadow shapes. So it looks like sun coming through leaves on a tree. But the important takeaway here is the way that I used the custom brush. What I wanted to create was an interesting silhouette shape. Really, I just wanted to create that layer mask. And the easiest way for me to do that was to do it in 2D on a different canvas. And that's where the shape quality of that tree brush was really useful. If I had tried to use that exact same randomized tree brush to paint in this image, it never would have worked. It wouldn't have been in the correct perspective. So sometimes it takes a little abstract thinking to consider how to best create and use a custom brush. So since this video focused on using custom brushes for shape, the next video is going to talk about using custom brushes for texture, how to use them as a nice overlay. So stay tuned for that, and thanks for watching. Hey guys, this is Matt Core from ControlPaint.com, and today we're going to talk about achieving smooth, clean lines inside of Photoshop. But as a quick reminder, if you look below the post, you'll find links for free brushes and worksheets, as well as in-depth premium series available in the Control Paint store. Now, especially if you're not using a Cintiq, you might find it really hard to get these sort of smooth swooping curves. And I've recently found out about this little piece of software called Lazy Nezumi Pro that is $30 and sadly only works for Windows, but it's really going to help you smooth out those lines. So what it does is it sort of averages out your strokes. So here I am drawing with it turned off, and you can see that I get sort of jagged lines. And then I will turn it on, and you can see those same sorts of strokes are being averaged out into a curve. Because we know the alternatives, right? Everybody knows I'm going to draw so slow that I'm going to get it exactly right. But then what you're left with is a wiggly line. So that's no good. And then the ever popular, I'm going to get it one perfect stroke. Up, nope, undo. And this one, nope, not quite. One more time, nope. You can do this for as long as you like. It's never very fun. And then there is my least favorite of all, the scratchy stroke, where you make your careful line by drawing a million little lines to get there, and what you're left with is, well, not ideal. But when you turn on Lazy Nezumi, one stroke is much closer the first time. I mean, this is maybe a huge crutch, but used sparingly, I think this is easily worth $30. So you see, I am drawing, and it looks like there's a little lag, but then it slowly catches up, and in the process, gives me a nice smooth curve. If you are inking or trying to get a very nice outline that you want to keep in your drawing, this would be an awesome benefit. So that alone is very cool. But what I really like about this software is that it is extremely customizable. So you can expand this and see the details. And the one I'm using called Massive Smooth is just one of the many presets that the software comes with. Another one I really like is called Pressure Gain. Now in the past, I've talked about your stylus requiring a little too much pressure that sort of hurts your wrist in the long run. And I've showed you some pieces of software that'll allow you to use a lighter touch. Well, this is by far my favorite solution for that problem. This preset here just doubles the pressure. So if you wanted to get 100% pressure, you could press with 50% force and it would double it. This alone is worth the cost of admission. $30 to save your wrist is definitely worth it. But it doesn't really stop there. I mean, there's all these presets that it comes with, and you can make your own, and any of them can be assigned to a keyboard shortcut. Now, I wish this were Mac software, but at this point it is PC only. But it does have a free trial, so it's definitely worth checking out, even if you're not sure that $30 is worth it. But my guess is you try this for a few days and you'll have trouble envisioning yourself not using it. Now, and if you're worried that this is me being sponsored by the software developers, I'm not. In fact, the best part about Control Paint having a store is that I don't need to have a sponsor. You guys are the ones that support the site. And so if I find some cool software out there, I'm just going to tell you about it. So do yourself a favor and check the link at the bottom of the post, because this software is really going to help you get some clean lines. And as always, have fun painting. Thanks for coming to the site, guys.